Thank you so much, Cindy, for your inspirational words and your leadership on this issue. Delivering true change can only happen if we act at scale and in partnership, and that means getting the private sector on board. And I'm delighted to introduce our business panel. We have Dan Wiedemann, the Managing Director of Humanity United, Kirsten Cooper, General Counsel and Company Secretary of Aviva, Darren McBain, Director of Global Sustainability at Thai Union, and Anbin Phan, who is Director of Global Government Affairs at Walmart. We have 15 minutes for our remaining on this session, so please, we want all your insights crammed into short statements. But if I can come to you first, Kirsten, if you could, you're a leading global investor. It'd be great to get your insights as to what Aviva is doing, but also how you think you could get change in your sector.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, I'd like to focus on how we use our leverage externally through active ownership. My company is 320 years old, employs 30,000 people and has 33 million customers, so it is truly a long-term sustainable business. And as an investor, we have a history of active stewardship, and we actively promote good practice among the companies that we invest in. We have over $700 million of assets under management currently. So although at times the financial sector may seem situated a long way from human rights violations on the ground, we play an important role in the chain of events which impact the protection of human rights of many people. And we truly believe that engagement can encourage change. We have a very clear investment and voting policy with human rights criteria. And if we consider that a company's performance falls short and that shortfall will therefore have an impact on our investment decision, we will engage with the management and the board to improve their performance. If they don't, and we give them plenty of opportunities, we will vote against them in terms of their annual report and accounts or their annual general meetings. Our ultimate sanction is to divest of the investment if we do not feel that they are making the progress that we would expect to see. And in terms of the wider industry, I just want to emphasize the work of the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark. We're one of the founders of the benchmark, and that ranks companies based on their human rights performance, including violations and modern slavery practices. The 2017 Corporate Human Rights Benchmark assessed 98 of the largest publicly traded companies in the world on 100 human rights indicators in a few industries: agricultural products, apparel, and extractives. This year's assessment will be launched later in November, and it will be quite clear to see how the companies in those sectors are performing. And lastly, the benchmark is the type of benchmark that will be housed under the World Benchmarking Alliance, which will be launched this evening at the New York Public Library. The WBA will rank companies on their sustainability more generally on a sector-by-sector basis, and therefore it will be clear and transparent to all as to how companies are performing in the areas of human rights and in other areas covered by the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you so much. The WBA, I think, is a huge step forward. I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm turning to Darren now. You're a leading producer of fish and seafood. Responsible sourcing is obviously very important to you, but you've got a very good reputation in the industry, and it'd be great to hear what you're doing and how you're using your reputation to lever support from others.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak to you today. So Thai Union, as one of the largest seafood processors in the world, was really shot into the heart of issues around modern slavery with investigations into seafood supply chains in recent years. And I'd like to share with you some of the points that I think have really made a difference. And making a difference and having an impact is what this should all be about. The first one is acknowledging that there is an issue and that you want to show leadership. So we're very fortunate that our CEO took on the issue of modern slavery to say, this will not happen within our supply chains. We need to take action. And you don't need to be an expert in this to make a difference. You need to care. When we started doing ethical recruitment over 2 years ago, there was actually no manual to say this is what a business needs to do. But what we'd find out from working with our NGO partners was that our workers were coming to work with a debt that they'd built up on the way to employment. And we started working with those NGO partners, putting in changes. And once we heard our workers say they were so happy to be working at Thai Union because they didn't have the debts that some of their friends had coming from Myanmar, that's when we knew that we were really starting to make some change. The second point is about risk analysis. You need to absolutely understand your supply chains all the way back to where they begin. We understand and speak to the workers on the vessels that provide the fish, that goes into the fish meal, that goes into the shrimp feed, that goes into the ponds to bring the shrimp to people all around the world. That's a long supply chain, but you absolutely need to know that if you're going to make a change. We talk about traceability as being the backbone of our sustainability program. Technology like blockchain can be fantastic, but if you don't have that basic information of where your product is coming from, then you're really left with a challenge. I think the third most important issue that we've been working on is making sure that worker voice is at the heart of what you're talking about. Because ultimately, this isn't about policies, this isn't about statements, this is about helping people and helping to end modern slavery. We heard a fantastic statement from Rani earlier today. Thank you very much. And I think she highlighted that this is about real people and real change. We did a program last year working with some partners, putting satellites on some fishing vessels. This was partly to collect electronic catch documentation, but also we gave all of the fishers on those vessels an app that they could communicate back to land, back to their loved ones. This was important because these are people. They need to live their lives. They could raise the alarm for help if they needed to, but actually they wanted to be in touch with their wives, their children, and to be able to communicate. So I think having a worker-centric view of how we're going to tackle modern slavery is really an important part about creating the change that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. And now turning to Anbin, Walmart's clearly an enormous global retailer with very complex supply chains. What do you think is required to actually get the step change we need globally?
Thank you so much, Secretary of State. It's a privilege to speak here today. If we're looking at step change, we really have to begin to consider three areas that I would like to offer from our experience as Walmart. As you may know, Walmart is a global retailer. We have a presence in 27 countries, and also we source from around the globe. To give you a sense of our scope and scale, we serve 270 million customers per week. So our supply chains faced all sorts of geopolitical and regional scenarios. So first of all, we believe that workers deserve healthy, safe working conditions free from forced labor. And we focus primarily on how we work, our audits, our standards for suppliers, our escalation of forced labor. So internally, businesses need to have systems in place to do the due diligence at a very base level. But we recognize that the solution to forced labor is not something that one company can solve, one industry can solve, one country, or not even one tool or idea. So to really have step change and to really engage business, this is the journey that we've been on. First, I recommend start at the top of the house. This is something Darian just mentioned. Our CEO, Doug McMillan, made a commitment to the ethical treatment and recruitment of workers globally. And from that CEO commitment, there are resources, tools, and cross-functional efforts that are possible. We have a team, such as myself, that works on government relations. We have been a part of the Bali process and putting forth the AAA recommendations. So we advocate with governments from Cambodia to Malaysia to Thailand to Mexico on areas that matter. We have our foundation, which works not only to understand the prevalence of where human trafficking and forced labor exists, but also to understand where we can bring disruption. And also, of course, our responsible sourcing team, our internal efforts, and our industry initiatives. From there, I really offer two more ideas, which is let's also have a business mindset. Business does two things really, really well. We understand the competition, and we know how to hit the numbers. You know, our merchants really sell products from around the globe and buy from around the globe, and that's how we've been able to be this global retailer. And what do I mean by know the competition? Too often we are working at cross purposes in our community, but the real competitor is out there, the labor brokers, the traffickers, those who would put a young child in a cage. I was horrified to hear that today. And those are the people, you're so brave to share your story. Those are the people who are really the competition. And also, really hit those numbers. We need to begin to focus on metrics to align around what the real issue is. That story of how the captives are set free, how people's lives are changed. And for that, we really believe in collaboration. Walmart is using our convening power, even during this UN General Assembly week at Concordia, to bring together world leaders and thought leaders, but also people who are working every single day to address this problem. How can we put some of that 10x thinking that was made famous by Google into this space? And also to really begin to use new tools and innovations in this space. And finally, something that is very true to retail is disrupt or be disrupted. This is what's happening to the retail industry today. And likewise, we need to disrupt the system of these complex forced labor networks where traffickers have been able to thrive and been able to recruit people into systems through misinformation and coercion. And so that's everything from changing the norms around ethical recruitment. How do we do that? How do we create that crosswalk that people walk through? Really, Walmart has committed to the employer's pay principle that within the next decade, that we will change the system where migrant workers are paying fees that are exorbitant that land them in debt. And really, I would just like to say technology and predictive analytics and crowdsourced data, that can begin the narrative, and how to put that information in the right hands can really make an impact. So let's go far and go fast together. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. And you mentioned technology. Dan, the work that you've done with Humanity United, what have you learned, and how can we use technology to help us combat modern slavery?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here and to sit on a panel with companies that are talking about time-bound targets, as Anbin just did, and worker voice, as Darian just did. It's a rare pleasure. There are far too companies at the table who are making such specific commitments. And one way we can get more companies at the table making such specific commitments is through the leadership of governments like that of the UK and my own country, President Obama's 2012 executive order on government procurement. These things bring companies to the table and essentially require them to do a better and more work. Technology enables us to make decisions more sort of with information that we gather more cheaply in a more real-time manner and at a scaled level. And if the main problem that companies face in trying to address modern slavery in their supply chain is that they don't really know where it's happening. They know which countries are risky, they don't necessarily know which suppliers or which factories or which plantations or which farms are risky. Technology can help. Technology can be used to reach out to workers, almost all of whom have mobile phones. Those workers can be asked about their conditions. Workers remain the best source of information about their own experience. The information that they provide should be used by multinationals to evaluate the suppliers that they work with, that they choose to supply from. That technology is ubiquitous. The application of that technology, there are 4 or 5 different companies that are trying to help multinational buyers use that technology. Of course, direct connections with workers also gives workers the chance to be empowered directly with knowledge or with skills or with opportunity. So technology in the manner that it can reach a scaled audience in the form of at-risk workers around the world can help companies make better decisions about their suppliers. The second area that we're particularly optimistic about is the mapping of supply chains. Software programs exist now for companies and are being piloted that help give light to hidden parts of supply chains, that map supplier relationships, that map trade relationships. What that especially enables multinationals to do is to figure out where they have shared suppliers, and particularly where those shared suppliers are risky suppliers. And if they can identify shared risk with others in their industry, they can take action to improve conditions on behalf of workers in those locations, and they can take action ultimately to disempower those suppliers from participation in their supply networks. So technology can facilitate scaled information access from workers, and to some extent a sort of an empowerment with knowledge to workers. And technology can facilitate the sharing of information and the mapping of information among companies. But the ultimate lesson really is that technology can only facilitate. And ultimately what is needed is businesses to make good decisions about which suppliers to favor and which suppliers to improve and which suppliers ultimately to avoid.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to everyone on our business panel today, and for you for taking part in this event. As I said in my opening address, this is a truly global problem and it requires a truly global response, and that is why it is vital that this is at the heart of the United Nations. Thank you to all of our speakers today, but most of all, thank you to Rani for really setting the scene and reminding us of why we're here, why we're doing this work, and giving a voice to those individuals we seek to help, and for your inspirational story and advocacy. Thank you to all the governments who have stepped up and made commitments, and the business leaders who are doing such fantastic work in this space. To James for the work that he's doing, and also to Cindy, who quite rightly reminds us that it's actually the people in this room that are going to really be driving this agenda. So let's really keep the momentum up. Let's really take this forward. Let's get others to lean in too. And each and every one of us needs to step up and do that, to innovate and to work in partnership to consign these appalling human rights abuses to the history book. Thank you all so much.